using the stimulant for hours on end. The welcome to multinational forces will be mixed. In town, the armed outlaws appear to have drifted away. The root cause of lawlessness and anarchy is not descending, however, it's simply hiding. Guns are still easy to buy from any number of stalls like these. A Russian-made Kalashnikov for less than $100, or a rocket-propelled grenade for a little more. Warning shots were fired at CNN when we tried to take pictures of the arms sales. The weather is inhospitable too, sweltering hot by day, and the country's infrastructure is as backward as it can be. If the multinational forces are in need of a lockup, the warlord in charge of this fortress prison is offering it. General Mohammed Aidid was imprisoned here 7 years for trying to overthrow the old regime. His gunmen say the Americans may use it. A handful of prisoners, 10 in all, are now held, an alleged killer and robbers. If law and order existed, the empty cells that once confined up to 1,500 prisoners would be overflowing. Now in Mogadishu, there's only one law, that of the gun. The prison overlooks the port, which will soon become another focal point of military operations. Securing the port here will be one of the primary objectives when the Marines come ashore. The military plan should begin with an amphibious landing, assault craft and helicopters moving swiftly to set up a bridgehead. The port has been closed for a month to relief ships. The last one that tried to make it was shelled. From here, you've got a good idea of how exposed the area is. Move over to the left, there are beaches that could also be used by the Marines. Further over, beyond the battlements of the central prison, there are the buildings that once represented the legal authority of Somalia, but which are now, like everything else, in utter decay. Rebuilding confidence in such a maniacal and fractured Mogadishu.
Indeed, many Somalis hope that the U.S. operation will go beyond restoring just hope and restore their country. CNN's Jim Clancy reports on what the Somalis expect from the Marines and what the Marines can expect to find here in Somalia.
The U.S. Marines who come to Somalia can't miss the spectacular shoreline on the Indian Ocean as they arrive. The inside view of the country, with a dilapidated infrastructure, lack of electricity and running water, isn't so pretty. And in Mogadishu, no matter what you see, you can always expect to be surprised by something you didn't expect to see. The teenage gunmen are certain to make an appearance, but this isn't the picture that will stay in the minds of U.S. Marines for the rest of their lives. This is a human being starving to death. Not a picture on TV or in Time magazine, a real person still breathing that hasn't had enough to eat in so long he is going to die. As the Marines move in to secure the points of entry for food aid, they'll see just how easy it was for the gunmen to rob food from starving children. It's their job to stop that, and it does pose risks.
They're not here to get into a shooting match with anyone. But if there is any resistance, as it has been made very clear, this time the business is to achieve that objective, namely the security of supplies, no matter what it takes.
One battle the Marines won't be waging here is the one for the hearts and minds of the Somali people. They can already declare an outright victory. The people in this city say they're ready to welcome the Marines and anyone else who will come, but expectations are high. The people here don't just want the safe delivery of food, they want their country and their future delivered safely from the hands of the street thugs. It will take time to erase the scars of war in this country. It will take international intervention to disarm the gunmen who rule these streets. And it will take all of the strength the Somali people have to bring their country back from the brink of starvation and destruction. Jim Clancy, CNN on the Green Line in Mogadishu.
Relief workers are concerned that they may become targets for resentful gunmen once the U.S. troops arrive here, and they've been told not to move around too much for the next few days until the situation becomes clearer.
Only anarchy and the rule of the gun, a tragedy many Somalis blame on former President Mohamed Siad Barre.
By clan rivalries, and Siad Barre has destroyed this country beyond anybody's imagination. And this is the legacy of Siad Barre that we're experiencing right now.
The origins go back to 1969, when Siad Barre seized power in a military coup. For the next 21 years, he ruled Somalia as a harsh dictator, favoring his clan, the Marihan, and repressing others. At first, Siad Barre was supported by the Soviet Union, then by the United States. During the Cold War, Somalia was viewed as a strategic asset near Middle East oil fields. With massive military aid, Siad Barre strengthened his power and tried to seize territory from Ethiopia in a war he lost at tremendous cost. When other Somali clans tried to resist him, he supplied arms to opposing clans. Gradually, much of Somalia fell into civil war between armed militias. Almost 2 years ago, Siad Barre was forced out of the capital by a clan uprising. He fled the country, but is still the power behind his clan's militia. Meanwhile, the clans that defeated Siad Barre started fighting each other in Mogadishu, killing tens of thousands and shelling the city into ruins. Since last March, a UN-brokered ceasefire has kept a tenuous peace between the two rival clan warlords, Ali Mahdi Mohammed in the north of the city and Mohammed Farah Aidid in the south. Aidid also controls large areas outside the capital, in alliances with other clan leaders. But there is no end in sight to the clan rivalries and violence, no sign of a political settlement that could allow the formation of any kind of government here. In northern Somalia, the dominant clan has declared its territory an independent nation called Somaliland, but no government has recognized it. Somalia is now a confusing patchwork of clan fiefdoms, with commanders who use clan ties and cash rewards to keep the loyalty of their young fighters. Outside the control of the warlords, there are thousands of other gunmen stealing whatever they can find. For the warlords and the bandits, the devastated economy here offers few opportunities for profit. So their prime targets are relief agencies that bring food, medicine, and supplies. The agencies pay the clans for protection. They pay for the privilege of landing their planes filled with food aid. They pay the clans for trucks to carry the food. But still, more than half the food sent here has never reached the people it was intended to feed. Food convoys are attacked and looted. Aid workers are threatened and robbed. Emergency relief plans are put on hold because warlords refuse to cooperate. The UN has been accused of ignoring the crisis in Somalia until it was too late, until last summer when news reports showed the extent of the starvation. In August, the Security Council authorized UN guards to protect relief supplies, but only on condition they first obtained the consent of the local warlords. Most of the 500 guards who have arrived are still in their barracks. Last week's resolution by the Security Council authorizes the use of all necessary force to protect relief operations, a decision without precedent in UN history. But military protection for humanitarian aid will not solve Somalia's political crisis or the underlying clan rivalries that caused this tragedy and could do it again. Stefan Katsonis, CNN, Mogadishu.
Somalia, in about 6 hours, they will find out.
Dangerous task of entering and securing a country that's turned wild. A lawless place that's being controlled by fanatical gunmen and vicious factional fighting. Most Somalis are welcoming the idea of armed intervention to end gun law and madness that's brought about a tragedy which has no parallel on this scale. The capital's main warlords have promised to keep their gunmen in check.
All the Somali people today are so happy and they are feeling that they will have the life again in their country and they will have the peace in their country and anybody can go anywhere he wants and can restart the job again. So I'm really very optimistic.
The vanguard of the military operation should start arriving just after dawn our time. That's in about 6 hours from now. What you should be seeing now is a live night-scope shot of the airport that's to become one of the main staging posts for the operation. A short time ago, the first US security order came into effect when the airport was declared closed to all civilian flights until further notice. And that includes the many aircraft used by various relief organizations. Well, the main warlords from both Mogadishu North and Mogadishu South seem anxious to avoid any sort of armed confrontation. And if the renegade gunmen get scared off by the massive show of force, the transitional period from gun law to peace should be made a little easier. But with a large number of half-crazed young gunmen still at large, don't count on that. It's been a pretty scary day for a number of reasons, with various incidents. A United Nations relief worker was taken and is still held, and CNN was involved in 3 incidents. One of our crews had its equipment taken at gunpoint in an area near the Green Line, but got it back, thankfully. One of our cameramen had a bullet shot at his feet while he was filming. And finally, one of our producers was robbed at gunpoint at the airport in an area where there were UN peacekeepers and had several $1,000s stolen. So everyone is a little edgy here. I'm Brent Sadler, CNN, reporting live from Mogadishu.
Brent, before you go, give us a sense of what it's like out there on the streets. Is the tension getting any easier as the hours go by and the arrival of the Marines approaches?
Well, certainly the tension was rising today after the relief worker was taken, and United Nations and Italian officials are trying very hard to get him back. But one of our technical vehicles, the gunmen who protect us, has just driven into our compound. Those people are still armed. Tomorrow, of course, the need to have gunmen may diminish as the multinational forces fan out in the city and then start working on the plan to spread out in the interior. At the moment, as I say, it's still somewhat edgy here, and we won't know what's going to happen, of course, until those troops start deploying.
Brent, I gather the gunmen you're talking about are more than just a lawless force. The fact is, according to the reports we're getting, it's a business there. CNN, I am told, is also employing a few of its own. Have I got that right?
Yes, indeed. We have 2 battle wagons. You may hear one of them revving up right now. That's got a heavy machine gun mounted on the top of its roof and normally carries about 2 to 3 gunmen. They receive about $50 per man per day. Not only the news networks like CNN, but the relief organizations also have their small private militias to help them, all of us, go about town because of the high levels of danger and the possibility of being shot or robbed or looted. Now, what happens, of course, when the Marines come ashore? What's going to happen to all the various paid gunmen by people like us and other relief organizations? These are just some of the difficulties that have to be worked out, and we await to see what's going to happen.
One more question I'm curious about while we have you. You mentioned in your report that the airport is going to be closed. That is, as you mentioned, the very airport that's been the conduit for relief aid coming in. Does this mean that, ironically, when the U.S. Marines and the U.S. Army comes in, the relief is going to stop coming in?
Well, the airport closed just a few minutes ago officially. So yes, indeed, that closes to the shipments of food or personnel, relief organization, non-military personnel. But of course, there are other airstrips elsewhere in the country, such as Belatwain in the north and other areas where relief flights technically can still go in and get large amounts of food out to the people who most need it. But these are going to be difficult hours ahead once the operation...
Unfolding pretty much how General Colin Powell outlined it a couple of days ago at a Pentagon briefing here in this very room as he drew a map of the airport. Getting that airport in shape is job one so that the massive airlift of U.S. troops and other equipment can begin. You could see as the sun came up, the tarmac of the airport didn't look too bad. We were told that while the airport runway can't support, say, a heavily loaded C-5, one of the bigger Air Force jets, it is good enough to hold some of the smaller planes, C-141 or perhaps even a lightly loaded C-5. So one of the initial jobs will be to get that airport in shape and get some air traffic control. Very early this morning, even before the bulk of this vanguard of Marines came in, they were already laying out some lights to set up a runway lighting system so that the airport could begin a 24-hour-a-day operation. And it's going to take a 24-hour-a-day operation in order to get everything going. We can hear some of the helicopters coming in, and it was interesting also the hovercraft, as we referred to before, the what's called in the Navy the LCAC for a landing craft air cushion, is capable of carrying a lot of equipment very quickly in over the shore. Bernie?
What's the mood over there at the Pentagon, Jim?
Well, it's very upbeat at the moment. There was a little bit of tenseness early on in the very early parts of this mission when some of the Navy SEALs went ashore and were captured in the glare of television lights. That made some people here quite uneasy, concerned that if there were any Somalis who were out to do harm to U.S. troops, that would make them, the SEALs, easy target. The Navy SEALs are used to operating under the cover of darkness very secretly, and it was a bit unnerving to run into a large group of news cameramen. But That got sorted out rather quickly, and now that, of course, light is, dawn has broken, as it were, the question of light is not a problem, and of course more and more forces are moving in to secure the area.
Of course, we're now getting to the main thrust of this operation. James Blackwell, we're seeing the deployment now, the Marines coming out of these choppers, taking up their positions. The operation is really underway.
Yes, Bernie, and what we saw at dawn was the initial assault company coming ashore, securing the landing site, and reporting back to the headquarters as to the condition, the nature of the opposition. The remaining 2 or 3 companies of this battalion are now deploying very rapidly in the CH-46 helicopters. For the troops inside those helicopters, it's a tense time. Their adrenaline's really pumping at that point. They've been told that it's unopposed, but they've got no idea what's on the outside. Once that door opens, they will move into a very close-in perimeter around the helicopter. The helicopter then moves out. The units then link up and provide the security around the airport. That is that very first mission.
Candy Crowley is at the White House.
Bernie, it's been a pretty quiet White House today. The president has been largely out of the public eye. He did see some people tonight at a Christmas reception. But about half an hour, 45 minutes ago, we did get the president's first reaction to what's now ongoing in Somalia. He issued a statement under the office of the press secretary, Marlin Fitzwater. In that statement, the president, Marlin Fitzwater wrote, "President Bush is pleased by the success of the initial landing phase of Operation Restore Hope in Somalia. United States forces went ashore at approximately 8:30 p.m. Eastern Time this evening, 4:30 a.m. Somali time. This initial phase will focus on establishing secure airport and port facilities. President Bush will be advised of developments in Somalia on a regular basis by his national security staff in the White House Situation Room." Earlier today, the president spoke by telephone with Ambassador Robert Oakley, our special envoy in Somalia. Ambassador Oakley briefed the president on his meetings with relief agency representatives and Somali factional leaders. Ambassador Oakley indicated that the discussions were encouraging. The president also spoke by phone with United Nations Secretary General Boutros Ghali and discussed with him the latest developments and plans for the humanitarian effort. The president met with his national security advisors around 5 p.m. this afternoon for a final update on the status of the coalition preparations. General Colin Powell, chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, said Operation Restore Hope was on schedule and proceeding well. The response from other nations to join the coalition has been quite positive. Forces from several countries are being integrated into the overall operation. And that, so far as this Somali operation is concerned, is what we have heard from the president through his spokesman Marlin Fitzwater, re-emphasizing, of course, in this statement the diplomatic work that went on before we saw these military operations. That diplomatic work certainly should be given some credit, I would suppose, and will be at some point by the president, for making this so far a no-shoot and no-resistance operation. Bernie?
And in Somalia, among our CNN personnel who aren't getting much sleep, who've been awake all night watching this unfold, Christiane Amanpour.
Bernie, I just wanted to say, you can see that all these helicopters are coming in. A few minutes ago, you sort of saw an Apocalypse Now kind of helicopter formation with the troop carriers coming in and then going out again. Jim Blackwell was saying they must be pumping, their adrenaline must be pumping because they don't know what they face on the outside. Well, we've just heard from some of our CNN personnel on the outside that the Marines who have gone through the airport, who are now on the streets of Somalia, have started to disarm, if you like, the local population. They are stopping cars, apparently. They are searching them for guns. People are having to come out, put their hands on the roof of their cars, and they are taking the guns away. So that is the situation going on right now, and it seems to be going very smoothly so far.
That information that Christiane just reported, Jim, tells us something about the orders being given to the Marines on the ground.
They're being told to secure this site, and apparently they are doing just that as we watch the larger helicopters land now, the CH-53s, that will unload perhaps some light vehicles, which they're capable of carrying aboard, or perhaps larger complements of infantry support troops. This is not an easy operation. Yeah, there appears to be You know what? I was going to say that was a Jeep, but that appears to be the lighter vehicles that they use for airport operations. That's what that. Those are the light armored vehicles that the Marines use for close-in work. Now,
pulling them off the tarmac to stay out of the way of the other incoming choppers.
Now, the word that the Marines are beginning to disarm Somalis in the city is interesting. They apparently are taking their orders quite seriously. They're not just going to move in and expect the Somalis to move away. They've taken this mission of securing the airport to heart, and as well as securing the city itself. And I would expect that they're making their way towards the port facility, the seaport, that will be used to bring forward the tens of thousands that are due to arrive later on in this operation.
Arriving United States Marines moving out after having choppered in, moving out, getting into formation, fanning out not only at the airport but into the streets, according to our Christian Amanpour. The Marines also have the control tower under control at the Mogadishu airport, and CNN's coverage of the operation, which has been underway for more than an hour, will continue in a moment.
Now, that was earlier. Right now, we're going to take a live picture of the American flag blowing in the breeze in Mogadishu, in downtown Mogadishu. The flag was raised about 5 minutes ago. We're going to show you some videotape of that. This is in downtown Mogadishu. You can see it going up. You can't see who's raising it, but Robert Oakley, apparently the special envoy, reportedly was there for that flag-raising ceremony, the special envoy appointed by President Bush. Again, the U.S. American flag flying over a temporary embassy in downtown Mogadishu, Somalia. Now, a little bit after the Marines arrived and secured the airport, the Operation Restore Hope Task Force Commander Greg Newbold held an interview on the tarmac with CNN's Brent Sadler. Let's take a look at that in replay, and here's what the task force commander had to say.
The people of the Mogadishu have been lining the fences around the airport, and they're anxious to see what we are and what we do. And it's kind of a coincidental event. They have been allowed through the fences that have been guarded by the security forces from Somalia, and they're watching the offload of our supplies and equipment onto the beach. I think it'll work out very well, because I think they'll be able to see that what we're doing is bringing in the engineer equipment and the supplies that ultimately will help them.
So in a way, it's an unplanned PR exercise.
Well, it is certainly unplanned, and you'll be the judge of whether it's a PR coup or not. But we're glad to have them. I would say that with the cooperation of the airport officials, we're hoping at some point to control this, because after all, what we're trying to do is bring in the relief supplies by air and by sea.
How soon will that begin?
Well, we hope to have the airfield open for flight operations this afternoon.
These people might be a problem then, might they?
They could be a problem, but fortunately the airport's officials are here. They have assured me that they will not have a problem taking care of it, and we'll clear the runways and be able to bring in the aircraft.
In one sense, this makes up for some of the scenes I saw this morning when some of your forces, some of your men had handcuffed with the plastic thongs some Somalis here, and the colonel from the United Nations I saw was most upset and got his penknife out and started cutting them free. What happened there?
Well, as you know, we came in under darkness, and we came into a situation that was completely uncertain, and as a matter of fact, with all the potential for catastrophe, violence. We were actually delighted that over the course of this thing, with over 1,000 men landing into an uncertain environment, that the worst thing that we had happen was when some people of uncertain loyalties confronted us. We put plastic handcuffs on, detained them momentarily. We've let them all go, and they're back into the city, where I'm sure they prefer it, and we do too.
We must be friends with Americans. Decided that, and we agreed already.
Okay, and what about the guns? What will happen with the guns?
And we like to be collected all the guns.
You will?
Well, we like. Because if the guns are not be collected, there will not be. But the work which Americans will do will not be only food distributors, but to collect all the weapons.
Those are some of the sights and sounds of what's...
What is your name?
Rifle, and there's also a light machine gun. Ross?
Hey, get over here. Okay, let's go. A little bizarre, though.
Well, that may very well be true. I can see right now below me at the airport 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 Somalis on the ground, flat on the ground. Their arms raised in front of them. Marines walking over them, trying to separate them here. One of them has his leg between two bodies there. Unit that is here, the lightly armed Pakistanis, 500 or so UN troops who've been here attempting to maintain the peace. Take the picture. Tell them.
Yeah. Let's go.
What's
You don't smoke. Oh, man. Thank you. I'm sorry if I could have Pete. Yeah, I'm sorry. If I could have you scoot back, please. Next, please. Thank you very much. Okay.
Yeah. You speak English?
Yeah, I do speak English.
All right. Est-ce que quelqu'un parle français aussi?
No.
Yeah.
You like Americans to come?
Of course, I like that Americans come here.
Why?
Because Americans are going to save our lives. They are not going to interfere our internal affairs, but they are going to save our lives. We are here and dying for starvation and malnutrition. So that is why the Americans are not to see all the human disaster which is going in Somalia.
Area. A few weren't very happy with the treatment. As 2 or 3 helicopters hovered above them, the Marines fanned out to establish control and plug up the holes in their security perimeter. The area is surrounded by a makeshift barricade of cargo containers stacked one atop the other to keep out looters. This port is at the heart of Operation Restore Hope. Hundreds of thousands of tons of food aid will come here. And here begins the Marines' mission to protect that aid and see that it gets delivered. For more than a year, the port of Mogadishu symbolized all that was wrong with Somalia. Relief vessels were only allowed to dock if local warlords got a share of the shipment. What wasn't paid in bribes was often plundered by gunmen. For many Somalis, the arrival of the Marines symbolizes a fundamental change in direction. They turned out by the hundreds to stand on hills or street corners and witness the operation underway. Relief workers say now that the Marines have arrived, they can bring in tens of thousands of tons of food already aboard ships and ready for unloading. Jim Clancy, CNN, at Mogadishu Port.
When the first U.S.
and camera crews and U.S. soldiers
food supplies choked up for weeks. Troops detained dozens of Somalis, although most were quickly released. Next, as many as 36,000 U.S. troops and thousands of others will move into the interior of Somalia. They'll try to make sure that food is safely distributed to famine-stricken areas further inland.
A few dozen elite Navy commandos came ashore first near the capital, Mogadishu, in kayaks and rubber boats. They were followed by heavily armed Marines in helicopters and hovercraft. Together, they secured the capital's seaport and airport before moving out into the rest of the city. Having taken Mogadishu, the Marines will then want to secure control of Baidoa, which also has a large airfield. Planes will begin to fly in the bulk of the U.S. troops, 28,000 in all, and small contingents from other countries. Camps will be established at 3 other centers. From these bases, troops can fan out across the country and secure relief routes into the worst famine-hit areas. From Mogadishu, our correspondent George Alagaya has sent this report.
It was about 5:30 this morning when the main batch of U.S. Marines were brought into Mogadishu Airport and Harbour. Operation Restore Hope, the first time the UN has authorized military intervention for solely humanitarian purposes, is underway. Some 1,800 troops should be in place by the end of the day. And then comes the job of winning hearts and minds. It wasn't a good start.
Hands up, palms up, go, palms up, cover me.
On the ground are men whose job it has been to guard the hangars. They were apparently unarmed, but treated in what can only be described a humiliating manner. It took the intervention of UN Commander Imtiaz Shaheen, till now unpopular with many in Mogadishu, to have the men released.
I think the proper thing that everyone must understand is this is a fast-moving situation, one where people have to apply good judgment at every turn. And as I came on,
but straight away he had to deal with some local reaction.
Now, what people will be taking, you know?
Well, when the Marines come ashore, and the Marines' mission is to safeguard themselves as well as accomplish their mission, in a situation like this, they must take appropriate action based on what they have been taught. And I think it's a tribute to them that there was no firing and that there was no abuse.
It wasn't the only episode that didn't go to plan. Ahead of the main landing, a team of US Navy SEALs, trained to work behind the lines, came ashore to find nothing more hostile than the glare of press cameras. Throughout the day, the movement of men and material has gone on without a stop. This was the first of many C-141 transport planes that'll be landing here. It'll be like this for a few more days as the Marines establish a logistics base. Eventually, about 30,000 troops will be involved. The business of escorting food relief into the remote famine areas won't begin till the soldier supplies are in place.
We're going to expand the perimeter because only from the high ground are we going to be able to allow relief flights and the ships carrying relief supplies to come in here so that we can provide the food to the Somalians.
After the somewhat tense beginning to the day, the atmosphere is now much more relaxed. For many months, gunmen prevented Somalis from getting into the airport. Not today. The Americans are keen to establish contact, to show they have nothing to hide. And in another sign of change, the Stars and Stripes flew over Mogadishu for the first time in 2 years. The country that armed Somalia during the Cold War is now picking up the pieces.
This is just another symbol of the peaceful evolution of events here, and we hope it will continue this way.
Those who've come into contact with the intervention force seem taken aback by the sheer size of the operation. It took a little over 2 hours for the Marines to secure both the airfield and the port this morning. That was the easy part. Persuading all Somalis that they're here to help will take a lot longer. George Alagaya, BBC News.
The Pentagon claimed to be dismayed by the production. Television lights put lives at risk, they claimed, though officers helped provide live commentaries for the folks back home.
However, stated that arming the Somalis is not one of our stated missions. However,
the White House said President Bush was pleased by the success of the first stage of the mission, and officials confirmed they still hope most combat forces can be pulled out before the end of January.
Because the clan leaders, in effect, gave their troops instructions to stay away from the areas that we had identified where U.S. forces were going to be. There's been relatively little contact between our people and the folks carrying weapons in Somalia. That may change once we spread out into the city, secure the city and the routes out to the more remote areas, and at that point it might be appropriate, for example, for us to begin a program of offering bounties for weapons.
We believe that
force will also move into 3 towns in the southern part of the country. Other main targets of the mission are the towns of Bardera and Kismayu. Also now in Somalia is a small unit of French troops seen here boarding transport planes in neighboring Djibouti. Troops from other nations taking part in the UN mission to Somalia are expected to arrive in the coming days. And Buckingham Palace...
This woman, her hungry child crying at her breast, said the clattering of the helicopters overhead gave her a headache. But her tired irritation appears to be food than at the prospect of peace. There is relief in Mogadishu that the gunmen who terrorized the city only yesterday could scarcely be seen on the streets today.
Most of them, they are very happy, and they want to welcome them because they don't like the gun.
Outside Mogadishu General Hospital, a police chief and his men are still armed and on guard. They say the word has gone out by radio for all gunmen to hand in their weapons, though few have actually done so.
We give order. If come American say give me rifle, they give American give rifle.
We give orders.
What is perhaps surprising about the reaction here is that it is so low-keyed. There has so far been no rushing to the waterfront pleading for food. There have been no jubilant crowds gathering to applaud those who are to liberate them from their misery. More than anything, people here seem too tired to celebrate, simply relieved to be told that they will soon have food.
La dittatura prima filocomunista, poi dopo la guerra dell'Ogaden nel 76 filo occidentale. La Somalia fino ad oggi è stata il principale beneficiario della cooperazione italiana. Il nostro paese ha versato a Mogadiscio centinaia di miliardi per realizzare grandi opere pubbliche, campagne d'alfabetizzazione, per l'insediamento di piccole strutture industriali. Il 27 gennaio del 91 i guerriglieri del Congresso della Somalia Unita cacciarono Siad Barre da Mogadiscio. Da allora il paese è nel caos per la lotta tra i diversi gruppi guerriglieri. E una delle più devastanti carestie che il Corno d'Africa ricordi ha affamato la popolazione. Non è semplice districarsi tra le decine di clan in cui si dividono le tre principali etnie somale, i Darod, gli Irir e i Saab. Attualmente i principali schieramenti che si contendono il potere e che saccheggiano gli aiuti internazionali
Within about the last 7 in the perimeter.
There's all kinds of holes all over the place. So it was just like you kick one guy out and you see like 20 minutes later he's back in again.
But the gaps are closing fast. And after months of unemployment, the port police are now back on the job, helping the Marines with their own methods of crowd control. Until the Marines arrived, this port was the most dangerous part of town. There were hundreds of gunmen here, many with heavy weapons, all of them looking for a share of the cargo for their clans or for themselves. Now, for the first time in 2 years, the port is quiet and empty, with enough security to guarantee there'll be no more looting of relief supplies here. The next step is moving food to the people who need it. First, 9,000 tons of grain in the port warehouse. Then 30,000 tons more on 4 ships that UN officials say could arrive here within the next 10 days.
The UN is ready to start immediately moving that food out of the port into the countryside, into those parts of south-central Somalia where people still need food.
The Marines will escort the food convoys leaving the port, and they're ready to move.
And there's plenty of food there. The sooner we can get out of here, the better.
We had a technical traveling west to east on the main road break.
But beyond the Marines' perimeter is a lawless city and a nation in anarchy, bristling with weapons. Securing the port and the airport here has been easy. Some of these men worry maybe too easy. Gary Stryker, CNN, Mogadishu.
Mark their first close-up look at the Americans who have come to help them. They liked what they saw. Echo Company, 2nd Battalion, 9th Regiment, is a tough, disciplined point company for this operation. But the sudden turning of a routine truck convoy into a sort of victory welcome celebration caught the Marines by surprise.
It felt like a parade, like we're welcome, like they want us here. So it made me feel pretty proud to be an American and be here.
Inside the gates of the American Embassy compound, closed since January 5th, 1991, when the Somali government fell, Echo Company went to work digging in.
Let's go, back out there, let's go.
Just put one gun up there facing that way, and one gun up here in front facing the whole front right here.
Now in their second day of Operation Restore Hope in Somalia, the Marines are feeling good about the way it's been going.
So far, so good. Like I said, we're really happy about what's happened so far. Can't complain at all.
Let's go, get up!
Because they are a point company, Echo Company is usually the first to arrive, to set up defenses and hold a position until the rest of the Marines are brought forward. At one point, a villager showed up, only to be politely but firmly told to leave. It is exactly the sort of thing that makes these men nervous.
We weren't really sure what it was. Kind of scary for a minute.
Sporadic rifle fire has been heard in Mogadishu ever since the Marines came ashore at dawn Wednesday. Echo Company said they thought they had been the subject of several rounds at the airport. So far, no one has been injured and the Marines have not fired back. At the U.S. Embassy grounds, the Marines hit the deck when a series of quick shots rang out.
Get down!
Buildings on the compound have been thoroughly looted, and it's clear squatters have lived here for many months. It offers potential snipers good cover, so the Marines were quick to go through them just to make sure. At this point, Echo Company, in the words of one gunnery sergeant, is not even thinking about setting up tents. They will live in the ground and be ready to move out on short notice. The little glitches have not bothered these Marines, and in fact they're more than a little pleased with the way these first days are turning out in Somalia. Echo Company looks forward to clearing the way to towns and villages outside of Mogadishu so that the work of feeding the...
More than an illusion. Guns are here all right, you just can't see them. This French patrol expected to have a small arsenal of confiscated weapons on their first day out. 40 guns, said the Legionnaire. That's all we got, and they're in terrible condition. They've all been tucked away or driven out of Mogadishu. The battle wagons that once careered across the capital have kept their mountings, but lost the guns. If the military expected people to surrender all their firearms voluntarily, they're wrong. These were at the airport, one mortar tube and less than a score of rifles.
Some of these weapons were turned over, other ones were found as the Marines went through the smaller villages as around the airstrip here.
Guns have dominated Somalia's way of life for so long that getting rid of them may be insurmountable unless the multinational troops force people to give them up. A graveyard of rusting weaponry, including tanks and artillery, lie around the capital, remnants of the bitter civil war and strife that's ruined the country. These fighters are loyal to one of the main warlords, General Aidid. They were guarding his headquarters. The general says his men will stay away from the military. Monsoon rains swept through the markets. Until a few hours before the US Marines arrived, there was a brisk trade in gun sales. We secretly filmed Mogadishu's gun market. The goods weren't on open display, but it's still business as usual. Inconspicuous handguns are up in price, machine guns down, reflecting the market's needs. Defenseless citizens want all guns seized. Everyone who has a gun has buried it, says this Somali. They must get all the weapons. It's terrible. You can't imagine, she says. Logically, she's right, as the hospital, if you can call it that, testifies. No electricity, no lights, and no surgeons. The gunshot victims, if they're badly hit, might survive, but probably won't. The almost daily shootings stopped on the first day of the troop landings. But 2 Somalis were killed by French legionnaires, and a UN relief worker was wounded in an earlier incident.
Was shot near the UNISOM headquarters here while travelling in a clearly marked UN vehicle. Was shot in the top of the right arm. It severed an artery.
The armed threat may be invisible, but it's still there, and Marines guarding the airport treat it seriously.
This is rear air security for all the operations going on. Of course, with everything coming across, you got to be able to protect yourself. You might have some civilians trying to come across the airstrip if they see a lot of the food that we have here.
Now more of an active deterrent after the first Somali victims fell to French gunfire, the threat of retaliation must have increased. Tying down security in a country where guns are the currency of life will turn into hide and seek, because the fact remains that unless this mission to help stop the humanitarian disaster expands into a way of creating political stability, the weapons will simply reappear. That meeting was arranged by the US Ambassador Robert Oakley and United Nations officials. It lasted just over 4 hours, but it made substantial progress, if not a breakthrough. Both warlords, General Mohammed Farah Aidid and his opposite number Ali Mahdi Mohammed, agreed to a plan that would lead to the disarmament of the technicians, if they agree to go along with that, and a new way to achieve national reconciliation. A short while after the men embraced, which in itself was quite remarkable given that they spent so much of their time trying to destroy each other, their spokesman gave details of the new peace accord to waiting reporters.
It was very cordial, very amiable. Everybody was hugging and enjoying the company of one another. And finally, we reached some agreements.
Number one, immediate and total cessation of hostilities and restoration of unity of the USC. Number two, immediate and total cessation of all negative propaganda. Number 3, to break the artificial lines in the capital city of Mogadishu. Number 4, all the forces and their technicals should report in their respective designated locations outside the city within the next 48 hours and controlled by a joint committee. Number 5, the already established Reconciliation Committee of the USC should convene their meetings within the next 24 hours. Number 6, we call upon all Somalis throughout the country to seriously engage in cessation of hostilities and join with us for peace and unity of Somalia.
In the vicinity of international forces, the military briefer described them.
We have completed the port survey, and we have determined that as opposed to 2 vessels, we are now able to offload 1 ship pierside, and that offload is occurring right now, and the offload should take about 4 days. We will cycle the maritime preposition ships in to conduct both pierside and in-stream offloads to speed that process up. There will be no delays. In fact, we probably will be able to increase the offload because of the pierside capability. We have also had the arrival of 2 C-130 aircraft from the United Kingdom with 75 personnel attached, and they are going to be assigned to the contingent with the force assigned to provide relief operations, which are now under the aegis of the Combined Task Force Commander, and they will be...
The situation seems to be calm in Mogadishu, certainly a vast improvement over just 3 or 4 days ago. Perhaps the most important story, which of course was very heavily covered in the press earlier today, was the agreement between Adid and Almaty and the accord that they signed, the major points of which are listed here. That 7-point agreement bodes extremely well, not only for cooperation and the concentration of the weapons outside Mogadishu, but also, frankly, the fact that these 2 individuals control large groups and large factions throughout Mogadishu, through the Afgoy Bridge area, and rode up to Bali Dogo. We found the roads to be in very good condition. Of course, there's been a lot of rain and a lot of flooding. However, the road itself is good, so if we desire to send convoys up there, they shouldn't be impeded by road conditions. We also had reporting, however, that off-road travel, because of flooding and so on in the area, would be difficult. In addition to going to the airfield, which I described yesterday and what we found there, the aircraft also flew over the city of Bali Dogal itself, saw a few technical vehicles there, about 50 some odd people, but again, nothing unusual that should present much of a security problem to our forces when they go into Bali Dogal. Further to the north, we have continued reporting on the security situation in Baidoa. The security situation there is covered on the next graphic. This is a cartoon, if you will, of the center of the city of Baidoa, and by the legend here you can see the according location of each of the major non-governmental agencies and so on, and their relation, particularly, for example, the Red Cross location here in Baidoa itself. Baidoa is a fairly large city. In early April timeframe, the population was nominally 60,000. It is very difficult to get an assessment exactly what the population is there now. On the one hand, there have been a significant number, tens of thousands of refugees who have come into the Baidoa area. On the other hand, regrettably, they've also had an awful lot of people die. So the situation there is grim. We have continued reporting of fighting and looting. As a matter of fact, the International Red Cross headquarters, again located here in the center of the city, was looted on the 9th and on the 10th. Indeed, even the radios which they had used to coordinate some of their support were stolen. However, we do have general reports from most of our sources there that last evening the situation began to calm down somewhat. Going further to the south, we'd like to give you a quick rundown on the situation in Kismayo. We have continued reports of several checkpoints controlling the main road that goes in from the airport to the city. There are several checkpoints along this road in which local faction basically extract, stop truck traffic and so on, and obtain their taxes, if you will, as the truck traffic goes on into Kismayo. The port facility itself, we had a survey there and were able to determine its situation. There are continued reports of factions in the city. Again, one faction trying to gain position over the other. And unfortunately, we can also confirm independently that some hostages have been taken from remaining humanitarian organizations there. The numbers are few. The negotiations right now are underway for their relief, so I don't want to give more details of that. But I would say that unfortunately, this is not an unusual circumstance in Somalia, and we likely will see this kind of activity between the factions as one faction will take a hostage to try to gain a position over another. This could be expected to be continued. I would report, however, that in almost all cases, at least that we are aware, after a few days, either for food or for money, these hostages are released generally and no harm does come to them. But that does characterize the security situation in Kismayo, which is still very...
Ali Mahdi Mohammed out of his northern enclave, direct to the U.S. liaison office in the southern half of Mogadishu, controlled by his rival, General Mohammed Farah Aidid. Ali Mahdi would almost certainly have never come here under less protection. Another convoy brought Aidid, and inside, for the first time in more than 2 years, he met Ali Mahdi face-to-face in a meeting requested by U.S. Ambassador Robert Oakley.
The mood walking into the meeting was exuberant, for want of a better term. People were smiling, looked very, very happy.
Two men from the same clan and the same rebel movement that overthrew former President Siad Barre. Two leaders who then turned their sub-clans on each other, plunging Mogadishu into a bloodbath, killing tens of thousands of people. Since a UN-sponsored ceasefire last March, the city has been divided into hostile northern and southern zones, waiting for a spark to cause another explosion of fighting. The people in this city waited a long time for the two leaders to meet. And when it did happen, it took everyone by surprise.
It was very funny to hear about this meeting.
I want all Somalis to hold hands together.
The problem is not with the peoples. It's the, it's a political crisis going on to Somalia.
The outcome of their 4-hour meeting was even more surprising. An immediate and total end to fighting and negative propaganda. Reunification of Mogadishu. Joint control of all fighters and armed vehicles to be assembled in camps outside the city, and a call to all Somalis to join in reconciliation for peace and unity. If it holds, this agreement will clear out thousands of gunmen from Mogadishu and other areas, making it much easier for U.S. troops to protect deliveries of food and other relief supplies. And it could be a real beginning of a political settlement.
I would love to see a Somalia that have again a government.
My baby will be luckier than me because life will be better here now.
But Somalis know each other too well to believe the smiles and handshakes have solved Somalia's political crisis. Clan rivalries are deep, and there are many other armed factions controlled by others not represented at this meeting. By bringing these two leaders face to face at last, U.S. diplomacy and military power have given Somalis not only hope of ending starvation.
I think there is a substantial difference between them in the fact that one of them was trained as a businessman, which is Ali Mahdi, and the general was first of all a military officer, then he was an ambassador to India, so he was in the diplomatic circles. This is the main, I think, difference between them.
Is he brutal?
I don't think. Neither of them.
And General
as I knew them.
General Aidid, he led the other faction. Is he brutal?
I don't think he is.
Does he want peace?
I think he wants peace.
So what do you make of this then today? Is this for real?
I hope it's for real, and I'm very optimistic that it is coming to be real, because both of them realize the magnitude of destruction that this country is suffering at this moment, particularly of their disagreement.
In your country, virtually everyone is armed.
Yes.
There are maybe more weapons than there are crops, sadly, now. in Somalia. And it was said today after this meeting that the United States and the UN really must disarm the people if there is to be peace. How do you feel about that?
I think we have to be very cautious about disarmament when it comes. One thing is disarming thugs and looters who are running everywhere and who are killing the people and looting food and taking it from the needy people. Another thing is to disarm the factions which has a regular army under their control.
And which do you feel should happen?
I think, first of all, the looters should be disarmed immediately as soon as possible. When it comes to the regular army of the factions, I think we have to be very careful because sometimes it's very dangerous to disarm someone who is fighting someone else and is not, the other one is not disarmed. So you may have a genocide which has been caused by disarming simply some faction and not disarming the other faction. So I think it's a matter that should be approached very carefully. And I think what Ambassador Oakley is doing now in Mogadishu is really a very constructive way of not jumping to the problem and simply think of disarmament as simple as it is without giving any credit to the other implications.
Let me ask you this. After this brutal fighting over these past years, why are you hopeful that now suddenly these two men and other men presumably like them are going to stop fighting and peace can be returned?
Well, I think it has been always the character of the person. When you go back to the history, you will see people fighting each other. But at a certain time, when they came to the conclusion that they can't achieve anything by fighting each other, no one will want to die.
And you think the time
to survive it.
And you think the time is right now?
I think so.
You left Somalia in 1990.
That's right.
What's happened to your house?
Well, it has been destroyed as every Somali house in the country.
So you have nothing left yourself?
No, not for myself.
General Liban, thank you very much for your comments. Appreciate your time. We appreciate General Liban's time in the world today. We'll continue.
That two AH-1 Cobra attack helicopters from the USS Tripoli were shot at from inside the city by an unknown group of well-armed gunmen.
They were fired upon by an M113 armored personnel carrier with a 50 caliber machine gun. They immediately returned fire with TOW anti-tank missiles and 20 millimeter cannons, and they destroyed that vehicle and two vehicles that accompanied it.
It's not known how many Somalis were killed because when TOW missiles hit their targets, nothing is left. US officials say that uncontrolled gunmen have been shooting at helicopters and that the Cobra retaliation meant that they'd learned the hard way.
Technicals should be off the roads, but above all there should be no threats and no shooting at US forces. In this case they shot. They clearly intended to bring down the helicopter if they could. The helicopter replied in a very strong way, which fits American doctrine of use overwhelming force if you get into a fight, and it's also the safe way to do it, and we hope that the lesson is conveyed.
Earlier, another US reconnaissance aircraft flying at less than 150 feet was hit by rifle fire. The gunner said he did not shoot back because there were too many unarmed civilians in the area. This gunship was hit twice. One bullet glanced a section of the rotor, and a second round penetrated the other half of the blade, but the pilot managed to land safely. Somali radio reported that the attacks on helicopters was the work of uncontrollables trying to wreck a new peace accord. Low-level missions over the city will continue. Ironically, the first exchange of fire between the multinational forces and an armed Somali group happened as a shipment of food left the seaport. No emergency aid had left the warehouses since the arrival of US troops. 20 tons of food was escorted out by a contingent of well-armed Marines with light armored vehicles. It was going to the northern end of the city. But more importantly, no food has got beyond Mogadishu since Operation Restore Hope began. So far, around 3,000 US troops have arrived in Somalia and almost 700 tons of equipment. But the full flow of troop reinforcements has yet to begin. Meanwhile, more food is on the way to be offloaded at the now well-secured port, where more logistical supplies are being put ashore. Bringing in large amounts of emergency food aid into the city's vital port here may no longer be a problem.
Ported a small UN convoy of food from the port across the so-called Green Line that divides the areas controlled by the city's main warlords. The famine is far worse in the interior, where the Marines have yet to venture. But for the U.S. military, this distribution of food...
Those international troops will have the opportunity to perform a very important function here, and that's to get the gunmen off the streets and allow the relief workers to deliver the aid to people who need it most. That official word came about 4 hours ago when President Bush's special representative here in Somalia, Ambassador Robert Oakley, flew into Baidoa for meetings with local officials and relief agency workers. At Baidoa's airport, Ambassador Robert Oakley said the military was ready to begin deploying in the areas hardest hit by famine.
They've been working just as fast as they can, and you'll see very favorable developments here very shortly. And I'm sure the Somali people will welcome them, and they'll welcome what will come with it, which is the ability of the relief organizations to do their job faster, more effectively, with much more outreach. Thank you.
After leaving the airport, Oakley was given a dusty ride in a convoy armed with so-called technicals employed by relief agencies and news networks. He also got a glimpse of the crowded and filthy center of Baidoa that has absorbed tens of thousands of refugees. The talks were held at the compound of the International Medical Corps. The sandbags on the rooftop told how relief agencies had to hold off looters at gunpoint here last week. Aid workers appeared relieved that the arrival of those peacekeeping forces would come sooner rather than later. Oakley said the deployment would be peaceful.
With the cooperation of all the Somalis, we do not anticipate a military threat. We're coming prepared, as we always do. The military is always prepared for any type of threat.
And local officials here are preparing for the arrival of the U.S. and French troops. They have been warned that gunmen have to be off the streets. The press
have been surgical, most of them gunshot injuries and related, war-related injuries, mines, blasts, and stuff like that.
Colonel Omar Jess controls the city and claims to have stopped the violence, though some say his forces were equally responsible. The colonel wants the Marines to disarm bandits, though predictably he doesn't include his men in that category.
Certainly they did not come here to disarm us. They came here to assist us on help us on taking the humanitarian assistance to the needy people. That's the first step, I think. When we succeed on that, we will see the steps later.
There's no point simply pushing the weapons off the streets. They'd reappear. Only a system...
Mogadishu Airport. More than 550 Marines in battle dress and 140 French troops headed in the direction of Baidoa, 120 miles to the northwest. A town long besieged by hunger and starvation, Baidoa is home to 100,000 Somalis, half of them refugees from the surrounding countryside, desperately in need of adequate food supplies. The U.S.-led force will be counted on to open the road to Baidoa, to sweep away the danger of the armed Somali food pirates, who have in effect held them hostage. By late Tuesday Somali time, there was still no official confirmation that the Marines were moving to Baidoa, but there seemed little doubt that was their goal. Earlier in the day, Ambassador Robert Oakley, the special U.S. envoy in Somalia, was in Baidoa to pave the way. The same thing he had done in advance of last week's U.S. military landing in the country.
My purpose in coming here is exactly the same as my purpose in coming to Mogadishu, to help the Somali people understand that the United States military is an instrument of peace, an instrument of enabling them to get the sort of relief and humanitarian assistance which they have been deprived of.
Back in Mogadishu Tuesday, another cargo ship delivered a month's worth of supplies, enough for an 1,800-man U.S. Marine unit. And after 2 years, an uninterrupted flow of piped-in fresh water arranged by the UN, the first of it earmarked for hospitals in the city. But the day's major focus, the apparent U.S. Marine move into Baidoa. It is expected to be followed in quick order by advances into other famine-struck areas of Somalia. But in many ways...
The troops clean the mud off their weapons, their boots, their vehicles, and themselves. It was a job that had to be done by French legionnaires and U.S. Marines alike before the start of Day 2 on the ground in Baidoa. Thus far, these troops get top marks from the top brass.
It appears that they're doing exactly what we expected them to be able to do, is get in here and go out with a food convoy with a little bit of firepower in case they run into problems.
Marine General Robert Johnston and U.S. Ambassador Robert Oakley viewed the base of operations for the multinational forces here while a crowd of Somalis looked on. Johnston said the operation was moving swiftly, but not without caution.
This is not a benign environment. There's a lot of heavy weapons still out there, and the Marines are going to do it right the way they would do a military operation.
The relief aid itself was moving in with military precision. Wheat from the European community was unloaded before midday, bound for villages up to 25 kilometers from Baidoa. For the first time, the relief convoy will have armed troops for protection.
This should be a whole new operation. We're sending this convoy out escorted. It should be a whole new operation.
A similar shipment earlier this month to the same villages was ambushed by gunmen. 6 care workers were killed and 5 others wounded. The 50 tons of wheat represents an important precedent as Operation Restore Hope moves into Somalia's countryside. Helicopters will give the multinational forces an important edge in security, but it appears the Marines and Legionnaires face little, if any, resistance as they carry out their mission here. Jim Clancy, CNN.
Troops will leave Mogadishu for the Somali town of Hadur. A company of U.S. Marines will provide armed escort. Marines in the port city of Kismayu, meanwhile, are soon to be replaced by Belgian troops. But it could be some time before ground forces reach the Somali town of Bardera. Aid workers say the suffering there is the worst in the famine zone. Food comes in daily by cargo plane, but fighting between clans has closed just about all the roads. While Bardera...
Those who do have an education or business experience were driven out by the war. The entire economy revolves around the narcotic plant Kat, and now hundreds of desperate people are lining up for jobs with the U.S. military, only to be turned away. The bandits who rule this country have kept the investors out, and experts believe they'll stay out. It'll take at least 10 years for Somalia just to get back on its feet again. As youngsters roam the streets with no education and no future, there is little hope that things will change much. Experts believe this country will always be aid-dependent, an international basket case that risks turning today's short-term success into little more than Operation Colossal Waste. Christiana Manpour, CNN, Mogadishu.
Dangerous route. They quickly secured the town's dusty airstrip. Military spokesman says the troops had very little trouble extending control over the town.
At 4:08 p.m., the town of Bardera was declared secured by the commander of the task force, approximately 800 United States Marines. I got a better count on them today. That arrived, built around the 1st Battalion, 7th Marines. There were no major incidents on the route between Baidoa and Bardera, and all is reported quiet there now. They were well received upon their arrival.
This march into Bardera is part of a two-pronged attack on hunger in Somalia's interior. At sunup tomorrow, a joint French-U.S.
Trip over here, they're using that as their base. It was a very long and hot journey for the Marines. Minesweepers led the way. They traveled in all 280 miles in 72 hours. It was the longest and fastest mechanized movement ever. They came under fire briefly, but there were no casualties, and CNN's Brent Sadler has the story.
The road to Bardera was hot, bumpy and dusty, but a Marines advance guard made it through from Baidoa without encountering any mines. It had taken them more than 10 hours. Anxious hours, on mines alert every minute of the way.
We rigged up a rake, a mine rake on the back of this 510, nothing but a bunch of chains and one of these wheels right here, just to drag in case we straddled it, it would hit it and explode before these people got to it.
Units moved slowly, safely along the dirt track roads leading to Bardera, clearing a safe route for the heavy armor following on behind. Mines had been laid by rival factions during Somalia's 2-year civil war. No one knows for sure where they all are now. The Marines can't be too careful. The main thrust of the heavily armed convoy which left Baidoa followed shortly afterwards, moving first to the perimeter of the town and securing the airstrip. There is some nervousness given yesterday's explosion and first American casualties among the newly arrived U.S. forces. Somalis were taking the latest deployment very much in their stride. The Marines faced no armed resistance and moved rapidly to set up defensive positions around the airport and the entrance to the town. Local clan chiefs have promised to help the military locate and clear mines, a top priority. Opening a route to this town is but one side of the problem. The multinational forces have yet to clear safe passages into outlying areas where food distribution to the starving poses serious problems. Reaction on the streets here has been somewhat muted. As with all these troop deployments, the general Somali reaction is to simply stop and stare at the unfolding events. Brent Sadler, CNN, Bardera.
As well as stopping and staring, really...
I think every one of our young guys understands that this is why he came in the Corps, to deploy when called. And our young Marines see this mission as certainly one that is needed. And I think for the most part, they're happy to be here to be doing it. This is kind of, talking to some of our young guys as we came in today, this is kind of the Marine Corps' Christmas present to Somalia, and that's the way our young guys look at it as we stand here on Christmas Eve.
And tomorrow the Marines will come into town. They're going to meet with the town elders and with the relief agencies to see what they are required to do. This before they really fully begin their real work, which will be reports.
He still has a force to contend with.
Many Somalis call him a war criminal, a cold-blooded killer. U.S. Ambassador Robert Oakley meets with other warlords, but reportedly refuses to meet with him. He's a former general in Somalia's army, a former defense minister, and the son-in-law of former President Siad Barre. Mohammed Saeed Hersi, known by everyone here as General Morgan, is a warlord controlling with his allies a large area of southern Somalia, including Bardera, the latest town in the famine area secured by multinational troops. Morgan denies responsibility for atrocities committed by Somalia's military forces under his command during the civil war in northern Somalia in the 1980s.
What you are going to do if you are in command of that area and they were attacking the government and you had the force. The forces, the mission is to defend the country. I was defending my country.
He says the real war criminal in Somalia is his arch-enemy, General Mohammed Farah Aidid, one of the two warlords in Mogadishu who signed a peace agreement this month, an agreement brokered by Ambassador Oakley. Morgan accuses Ambassador Oakley of favoring Aidid and excluding other faction leaders outside Mogadishu. Morgan says he commands 4,000 soldiers and can raise another 10,000 militiamen on short notice. He pledges to cooperate with the multinational force. He says he's already met with U.S. military officers and agreed on a plan to keep his fighters well away from multinational troops deployed in Kismayo. Morgan says he would support a general disarming of all Somali factions. But he faults the U.S. for allowing Aidid to move his forces out of Mogadishu and to launch new attacks in other areas this week. Many Somalis consider Morgan an agent of exiled President Siad Barre, leading the remnants of Somalia's army. Morgan denies all that.
I'm not working for Siad Barre to bring back the power.
You don't take orders from him?
Well, I don't take about it. There's no order to take it.
Morgan says his responsibility now is to defend the ancestral land of his Darod clan, and for that he has widespread support in this region. General Morgan and his allies are still a force to reckon with in this part of Somalia, but they feel sidelined by U.S. diplomacy, and they warn there can be no peace and security here if they're ignored.
In Ireland, both Protestant and Catholic leaders react with outrage.
There was a French news agency report on Monday that jibed with what many, chaired by UN Secretary General Boutros Boutros-Ghali. The meeting has attracted most factional leaders and is aimed at establishing some kind of national reconciliation, despite the bitterness of Somalia's civil war. Speaking
and loot the all food.
A countrywide network of field kitchens set up and operated by the Red Cross have helped push death's door a little further away. 800 kitchens work on the same principle: get food into their hands and into their mouths as often as possible. In the largest ever program of its kind, the Red Cross and other relief agencies have been able to ease the suffering, slow down the death rates, and maintain sometimes intermittent but vital supplies. Unlike several months ago when food kitchens started riots, meals nowadays are more orderly. For as long as there are armed groups roaming the country, mountains of relief donations will remain Somalia's most valuable commodity. If the security shield covers all the stricken areas, Operation Restore Hope will have achieved its declared but short-term goal. The relief agencies made a superhuman effort to get this far. Death rates are slowing. International help, like a cavalry charge, arrived at the 11th hour. But those who fought this famine so hard say there'll be no glory, no lasting gratitude, and certainly no restored hope if the cavalry leaves before its time. In the unprotected areas, food, if it survives the looting, has to run a gauntlet of natural disasters. From Brava, 2 trucks with no escorts attempt to reach a severe area of famine, Sablale. Exceptionally high monsoon rains turned Sablale into a quagmire. The Red Cross kitchen ran out of food because of looters and rains. So death returned to Sablale. It took only 5 days of no food. As always, it's the displaced Somalis, those who've run from terror, who've lost everything, who wither and fall. Not even Sablale's suffering can match the so far untold agony of an area that's been lost to all attempts at rescue. It lies across the mosquito-infested swamplands of the Shabelle River, a region so inaccessible that a 10-hour tractor drive through the malaria fields is the only way in. Clan elders agreed to guide CNN to the region of Demai, marooned for weeks and cut off by floodwaters. Every bridge has been sunk without trace. A hollowed-out tree is the only way to cross into the stricken area. Beneath the surface lies another killer, crocodiles, which relief workers confirm have claimed the lives of villagers hunting food in the slow-moving water. Demai's nomadic communities, spread across large areas, are filled with disease, filled with desperation and helplessness. Their cattle are dying, the people are dying, at least 20 a day, they say, in a community of 11 villages. Not even the Red Cross has been able to penetrate these pockets of starvation. No food has reached this area for a total of 4 months. People are hanging on in the hope that US helicopters will rescue them by dropping in emergency food supplies. Sickness, like a plague, has swept through their huts, claiming one life after another, with no one able to...
In Badoa, 2/3 of the starvation victims are now adults, almost the reverse of the situation 1 year ago. 2 hours before the feeding centers open, carrying every imaginable container for food, women and children make their way through Badoa's town streets or through the surrounding countryside to get a meal. Small children sometimes walk to this care feeding center on their own. Tiny tots who have learned by now that you've got to bring what you need, then stand in line until they serve it up. The mixture of corn, peas, and oil has served the children well. Most appear healthy after only a short time in the program. Now they carry their food home to where a father lies sick, weakened with hunger. Children trying to share their own meager rations to help their parents, to help a family survive.
The main cause of this famine was a human cause, war. And if peace and stability come, then we hope that the conditions will improve very quickly. Once food starts to flow in, conditions will improve. But if peace and stability do not come, then it will carry on.
I think maybe the situation in Somalia will get better, said Suldana. She's bringing her 2- and 5-year-olds home to Gorasam to begin a garden. For this mother and perhaps tens of thousands like her, the traveling in search of food may be coming to an end. Somalis have been condemned to wander in search of food for nearly 2 years, some because supplies simply ran